Welcome to the Soulful Sound podcast. This podcast is about celebrating the leaders, teachers, and coaches who guide fellow humans to connect, heal, and discover themselves so they can express their gifts into the world. I am Simone Niles, a coach, sound healer, vocalist, and author. Thank you for being here with me today. Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the Soulful Sound podcast. I'm always so excited to welcome some amazing guests on this show. And today I'm joined by the beautiful Davin Youngs, who is a musical innovator who believes wholeheartedly in the transformational power of singing, voice, and sound. Yes, Davin has dedicated his life's work to using his voice to help others step into the power of their own. Oh my gosh, you are speaking my language or sounding my language. I love it. Welcome, Davin.
Thanks. Glad to be here. Excited to have a conversation with you.
Yes, me too. And I always just like to jump in. The very first question I ask all my guests is really just a bit about you, your story, and how you got into the work that you're doing today.
Yeah, I mean, isn't that a loaded question? There are so many angles we could take. I mean, the sort of the most direct path is that I've been singing my whole life, that my, mother tells the story of having me in the womb and not being able to sit still at my brother's musical rehearsal. And truly some of my earliest memories are of singing, and was very much supported from a young age in my voice and performance and singing. And pursued that throughout all of my childhood and into college. Ended up at a conservatory for music, studying classical voice, and then bumped up against that 21-year-old existential crisis where I was like, wait, what am I doing? What do I want to be doing? And spent a good chunk of my 20s and into my early 30s like really trying to figure that out, working in administrative roles and offices, and kind of singing professionally on the side in professional choirs and so forth, but all the while also teaching others to sing, because that's what a lot of folks do when they go to college for a voice, and then they try to figure out what they're going to do with their own, and they think they'll teach along the way. So I did that too, and that really proved to be very formative in terms of watching other people's process and journey and supporting them. And then, really finding that the work that I was doing there wasn't just about singing. It was always reflective of some greater themes that were happening in their lives. And so in my later 30s or mid 30s, I confronted that truth within my own life in a more sort of extreme way. And how do you say, I had a spiritual awakening. That's sort of like the simplest way to say it, but it was a dark night of the soul and a waking up moment in my life. And that was when I discovered sound as a healing modality, and really made it my mission from there forward to couple my work that I had done around the voice with my own voice and others' voices, and think about it through a more holistic lens. And so in my current life, that takes place in sort of three different facets. I do one-to-one and group coaching around voice, again, through a holistic lens, thinking about the voice as a tool for transformation and change in people's lives, using singing in particular as sort of the sounding board for creating change. And then I do corporate and professional work where I bring improvisational singing, what's called circle singing, to teams and executives. And then the work that probably will resonate with a lot of your listeners is I create immersive sound experiences. So my signature experience is called The Reset, and it's an immersive sound experience that centers my voice singing through looping devices to create a fancy pants sound bath. So it is very much an experience. It's like it veers a little bit more towards a concert experience than a traditional sound bath might. So yeah, that's the fast track version of how I ended up doing what I'm doing and what I'm up to now.
Yes, that's beautiful. And I have to say that that was one of the things that when I looked at your work, I thought, oh, I have to talk to this creative because you're doing some really fascinating stuff actually with sound. And I actually call my experiences voice baths rather than
Mhm.
sound baths, just to distinguish, like similar to you, voice is the main instrument and
Yeah.
really what we've been cultivating for so long. And but I love what you're doing, bringing digital and modern instruments and sounds into the work. And of course, I think that's a beautiful crossover, especially for a lot of people who are not yet aware of
Yeah.
what sound can actually offer as a tool for transformation. So, do you feel called to use your voice and sound in a healing capacity? Learn how to use your voice therapeutically to facilitate healing and well being. Whether you want to go deeper in your own healing journey or facilitate others in theirs, this training is for you. This online training runs over 5 weekends and offers theory, practice, resources, and support on your path to becoming a qualified sound healer and for your personal healing journey. So when you think about your own experience, so you spoke about your dark night of the soul and your spiritual awakening and going through that. Would you say there was a thread that perhaps in reflection now that you could maybe sense all the way through? You spoke about being young and singing and using your voice, but in terms of the spiritual awakening, I always wonder about that thread that led you to that point,
Yeah.
that maybe you could speak a little bit to that.
Yeah. No, it's a great question. And that's very clear for me. So,
Mm.
I mean, singing was always my connection to divinity or to a higher power or to the universe. Or I grew up, I'm the son of a minister. I grew up singing in church. I led people with my voice. I knew from a young age that my voice carried power in terms of guiding folks into enhanced spiritual experiences. I remember, I remember when singing at a young age in front of church and realizing that when I lifted my voice, the other people felt permission to lift
Mm.
theirs. The complicated part about that is I was a queer kid in a small town in the rural area of the Midwest, the United States, and I was hiding, and
Mm.
so there was this sort of duality in my life, and I resolved that to a certain extent early on in my 20s, but I think it wasn't until my 30s when I really was committed on a deep level to my voice being an expression of my authentic self.
Mhm.
That there was that I mean, the truth of the matter is no one can hide the truth of themselves through their voice despite our efforts, but most folks do effort their way into some sort of hiding around their voice. And so I just like came to this point where I was like, I just need to show up exactly as I am, who I am, in the freest, easiest way possible. That
Yeah.
also happened to correspond with some like functional, technical, somatic changes that I made with my voice through the guidance of a really profound teacher in my life. And that
Mhm.
also happened to correspond when I was beginning to use improvisational singing and
Mhm.
some methods around improvisational singing. So this freedom piece, it was like this, wanting to just be authentic with my identity, wanting to let the sound flow freely through my body, and to just make it up, like to not be held to the confines of some of the sort of styles or songs. And that's what I've channeled into, particularly into the sound experiences. And hopefully it's a big permission slip for anyone who comes to pursue that same sort of journey in their life if they feel compelled to do so.
Yes, yes. And I think, I mean, it's so beautiful the way you phrased that. So thank you for being able to, I can tell that you've done that piece already. You're very
Mm-hmm.
clear and articulate. What's interesting is the improv piece because I'm very much an improvisational a sounder, singer myself. And I know the power of that freedom. As you said, we can't, who we are and our essence, this isn't something that we can make up. I mean, we make it up as we go along in the
Right.
sense that we're evolving, but
Yes.
who we are, we are. And when we're able to express that freely piece for me very much is that improv.
Yes.
And as you well know, and as you've already described, when we're in that state of doing that with our voice, how it then impacts the freedom and free flow in our lives. So
Yeah.
I want to speak a little bit to that because one of the things that I I noticed on your website, and I had something similar years ago. You speak about free your voice, free your life, and that's a
Yes.
beautiful, beautiful concept, and more than concept, but let's use that word for now, that I think is really needed. So talk a little bit about that, how you came about that theme and how you run with it now.
Yeah. Well, it really emerges, first and foremost from my own experience that, like I said, when I found myself being willing to step into my own authenticity as a person, there was this corresponding effect that happened in my voice and vice versa. That those two things, I just believe wholeheartedly that if you're someone who identifies as a singer, if you're someone
Mhm.
who sings, even if you don't admit that to the world, but deep down inside that, singing and voice is a very essential part of your expression. And
Yeah,
spoiler alert, it is for everyone,
yeah,
but some people have different relationships to it and access to it. But if you are interested in pursuing your voice as sort of a form of creative expression, you will continually bump up against the areas of your life where you feel limited,
yeah,
unless, you are willing to pursue both of those things simultaneously. I just learned, probably the thing I know most about in this world is the sort of functionality of the voice. It's my like thing I've spent the most time in my life and have the most expertise on in an official sense. Like, how does your voice work in your body, the function of your voice?
mhm,
But what I realized is that you can't change the functionality of your voice without it having a greater impact on your energies, how it is that you show up, how it is that you know yourself to be. In fact, whenever we create these somatic changes, there's sort of an ego death that happens because we have to shift our understanding of who it is that we are. So I just really, a few years back, decided to name this truth explicitly, that the work I was interested in doing, I mean, I love to help people sing. Like that's exciting for me. But I just am not interested in that exclusively. Like I'm
yeah,
interested in people who sing and then they go, you know what? I also am ready to leave my job.
yeah, yes,
Or this marriage that I've been unhappy in for 20 years, I think it's time. And it's uncanny how people will come to take voice lessons or
yep,
do voice coaching, and then suddenly they're like moving across the world.
mm,
It's just crazy. Now, there is a vibrational element to this too. Like if you are willing to vibrate your being, you are shifting yourself at a cellular level. When you
yeah,
make certain sounds, especially new sounds that you haven't made before, you change yourself. So then there's this sort of momentum that comes with that where you're like, I gotta go do some other things too. And so that's why I just am fully committed, I think, from here forward to just like being really explicit about naming this voice stuff. It ain't just about the voice. Like this is
yeah,
about your voice as a mechanism, a tool for healing, for transformation, for growth, for change.
yeah,
And that's really at the heart of what I'm interested in my own life as well.
yeah. I particularly love that piece about making sounds that you didn't make before, changing you at a cellular level, and how true that is. And I think that there's so many sounds that we make, instinctively, or that we don't think about, that are unconscious, whether that's in states of pain or pleasure or whatever. And we come away from those sounds. So many people are so, I will say, unconsciously mute in expression, that there's so much, even the sounds that we naturally want to make, that we don't make anymore, to get back to that, and how important and profound that is. It's really lovely to hear the way you phrase things, because it hits home truth for me in all of my work. And some of the ways that you phrase it sheds a slightly different light. So I'm going to ask you a little bit more about, you mentioned authentic self and authentic expression a few times. And of course, if we are using our voice to express that, there will be a connection to whatever that is. So the
Mm,
expression is of whatever that authentic expression is of us, and our true identity, our true self, whatever words, higher self, whatever words feel right for people listening. So what are some of the things that you would say are the ways to
mm,
align that vocal expression with that authentic part, that authentic
yeah.
self?
Well, so the essence of Well, first of all, I think the word authentic self is fascinating and wrought. Like that means a lot of different things to a lot of
Yeah.
different people. And I think a lot of people, I've been challenged on that word before, rightfully, because it can sound like some hooey if you're like,
Yeah.
what are you talking about? And I think that's a really fair question. And I think that authentic self is not something um that we sort of can uncover and name. I think it's an experience that we have. So there are these moments where we are singing or using our voice or showing up in this world and we feel aligned. It just
Yes.
feels like us and we can't even explain why. Just like know from head to toe, like here I am, this is it. And for a lot of people, singing is like a fast track into that. Whether they think they're good at it or not, like they have these moments where they're in the shower, or they're in the car, or they're at church, or they're whatever, walking down the street, and they just let it rip and they go, oh, yeah, that's it. Like that feels like the good stuff. And so the path to finding that more often is to do it more often.
Yeah.
One of my teachers said, and I've always I have a podcast, also the name For Your Voice for Your Life, and there's an episode that's named after this phrase that was given by one of my teachers that she used, and she said, "To know the sound is to make the sound. The only way to know the sound is to make the sound." And there's this greater narrative that you are the sound.
Yeah.
So there isn't a sound. There's potential. Well, a question I asked recently of my listeners is, what is a sound that you can't make? Like, and that's a sort of a thought experiment. And then what are the sounds that you're not willing to make?
Yeah.
So if you want to explore your authentic self, you need to be willing to step into sounds that you might not have made previously or known that you could make. It's one of
Mm.
the beautiful parts about improvisation is,
Yeah.
it's a fast track into exploring the different parts of our voice.
Yeah.
And just as a quick shout out, my path to improvisation is through the work of Bobby McFerrin,
Oh,
who
master.
has, been a champion of circle singing and improvisational singing in community. And that's very much at the center and the core of the work that I do. Even the work that I do when I create immersive sound experiences is built on those
Yes.
improvisation models. But I came to that because I spent a lifetime studying classical music and sacred music and all sorts of, different types of styles. And I got to this point with my voice where I was like, I don't know what the hell to sing. Like, I don't know what I'm supposed to sing. And that's when I went to circle singing and I was like, oh, I don't have to know. Like I can just let it flow through me. And then like suddenly I know more about myself. And that actually informs what it is that I want to sing. So for a lot of folks, what I'm saying won't sound like a clear path because I'll often say like you just got to make some sounds.
Yeah.
And obviously there are strategic ways to do that through coaching or group coaching work. But it can start with the investigation of what sounds am I willing or not willing to make? What sounds do I believe are possible for me? And then
Yeah.
the last thing I'll say is the most important element of this, the most objective element you have is the experience in your body of making the sound. So a sound that feels freer and easier in your body is a more authentic and free sound. If a sound feels uncomfortable, if it feels tight, if it feels constricted, if it feels uneasy, that is a sound that is not as aligned with the whole of who you are. So I
Yeah.
always want to include the somatic aspect because your voice is of your body.
Yeah, this is beautiful. And I really like that you kind of pulled a little bit about that authentic piece because I do think that it is thrown around quite a lot, you know. For me it really is as simple as just like we have a unique fingerprint, we have a unique sound print.
Yes.
And in order to connect with that, it is through play, it is through exploring and curiosity and sounding and all of these things. So the improv piece for me is quite huge. And I think that that can often be really scary, right? For people to,
Totally.
how do I let go and just let anything out? And in that doing so, there's so much magic in that space. I will come back to that, but I just want to pull a few more
Yeah.
nuggets from
Yeah.
what you've
Yeah.
shared. So a lot of what I train people to become qualified sound healers as well. And one of the questions that often comes up is when I'm working with a client and I can intuitively sense that this is the sound that they need, but I'm not able to physically
Mm.
in that moment create the sound. It's either too low in my range or so high pitched I couldn't even try to make that sound in this space, or I've tried many things and I'm not going to hit that, I don't know, top G or whatever it is. What's fascinating about sound, and a lot of people are, I suppose, less aware of this piece, is that the vibration of sound happens even when it's not audible to the
Sure,
human
right.
ear. And so often I invite people to create the sound in their imagination,
Yeah.
because that imagination and that visual piece is so powerful, and the unconscious mind doesn't know the difference between reality and imagination. So if you can imagine yourself sounding that high pitched or low pitched frequency note, then the vibration still occurs, which
Yeah.
is what's so powerful and beautiful about this. So that improv and that play and that sounding is so important. And you can also explore what that would be in your imagination and in your mind for those sounds that physically perhaps your instrument is not capable of making in that moment.
I got to tell you though, what's interesting about that, and I don't even, I'd have to look for the exact research on this. I've heard this said before, and I believe it to be true, that you literally can't imagine making a sound that you can't make. So if I hear a pitch that's outside of the human range, my capacity, I couldn't imagine it coming out of my body.
Mm-hmm.
I can't. And this is why to know the sound is to make the sound. So I would say to your, a client in the situation or a student, it's like, that's such a great alert to what is possible for you.
Yeah.
That's gives you, it's compelling evidence to work toward something, because that is also going to be an avenue for connecting deeper with the work that you're doing. But like if I sat, I don't have a keyboard in front of me, but if I played a note on the keyboard that you could sing
Mm-hmm.
without making a sound, you could right now feel that in your body. You could
Yes.
imagine yourself, even right now, as I'm just saying it, I'm sure you're imagining yourself singing, people listening, they're doing that. We
Mm-hmm.
have this capacity, and it's really quite profound. But what I was thinking to what you're saying is, this is one of the laws of attraction, manifestation, is like, if I can think it, it's by all means possible, because
Mm-hmm.
thoughts become things. And that is very true with sound. And that's why it takes me back to the science aspect, where I promise you, you probably won't be able to think of yourself making a sound that you couldn't possibly make, if that makes sense.
It does make sense, though, in my personal experience, I think it's also sounds that we hear
Mm,
that might be of different frequency that our physical instrument cannot make. And
mm,
I say this because I've worked a lot in the voice coaching field as well.
yep.
And I know you probably will, most likely will have come across the difference between the physical range limit and then the
Mm,
psychological one, right? Those like, I can't hit that high note. And then you're like,
right,
that's
right,
cool, no problem. And then all of a sudden you're hitting it and you're like, yeah, you thought you couldn't. But
right.
then the instrument has a limit as to how high your
Totally.
larynx is going to go and how low your larynx is going to
Yep,
go. However, listening to music, listening to sounds, instruments, other things that have different frequencies to your voice
yep.
may not be something that you can actually match, but you can imagine.
Mm. Yeah, I think I'm more thinking of like because I'm totally with you on, and what I'm referring to is, I'm not referring to what people think they can sing, because most people don't
Yeah,
have a
of course.
full I would say even me, like I'm sure there are sounds that I haven't accessed. Although part of my disposition, my intentional disposition, is to be fearless about, it is my intention to be open and willing to make any
Any
sound.
sound.
Yeah.
Mm.
And that's been like a very specific intentional choice. Most people, that's not how they're moving throughout the world.
Yeah.
They have a lot of fear around what sounds they should or shouldn't make. And so what I'm speaking to when I'm talking about that is the body's capacity to make sounds.
Mhm.
And I guess I haven't really contemplated that idea of imagining the sounds of others. So I have to think more on that. But I do believe in the power of intention, and I do believe in the power of imagination. And I think a lot of times when people hear imagination, it sounds it sounds lighter than it
Mhm.
is,
Yeah.
like, because it sounds like hooey pooey, like mumbo jumbo. And really, imagination is how we make our way into anything new.
Yeah.
It's how anything
Yeah.
manifests.
Yeah. Yeah, and as you said, if you can imagine it, then it's
Yeah.
possible, right? And
Yeah.
we've seen that in so many ways in this world. And when it comes to that authentic piece, I often talk about authenticity and that expression, somewhat like a what's the best way? A revolving door
Mm.
between our inner universe and the outer world,
Yeah.
because the alignment has happens when you're moving through life, as you said,
Yeah.
those moment to moment to moment. It's not I've reached my authentic self here on
Right.
and forevermore. And so I love that you've kind of broken it down to it's those moments when you just know you are in that frequency, and you are aligned with how you express it, how you relate, how you are, what you're doing, and all the different things and facets that we have in life, where you can sense that that is exactly what needs to happen moment to moment. So I'm so pleased about that piece. I just wanted to bring it back because it's a nuance that's not often mentioned, and I really agree and believe that to be true. So
And we
that's wonderful.
change. We're in
We
constant state of
evolve,
change,
yes.
like, and this is one of the things that's so cool about the voice, I think, because like your voice is of your body, and your body is constantly shifting and changing and aging.
Yeah.
It's aging. You're moving on a train toward death, and so there's this urgency, and I say that with humor and love.
Yes.
Like there's this urgency to keep intimate with this body as it shifts and it changes and it moves, and your voice will very literally, the sound that you make is not the sound that you made a number of years ago. And
Yeah.
I often meet people that are clinging to this old sound, and they find themselves in perpetual disappointment that they don't sound like they did when they were in high school. And I'm like, yeah, but you're in this beautiful body now that has new stories, and that information is still there. It's
Yes.
still being carried with you. It's still in the mix, but there's something new that constantly wants to emerge. We are creative beings, and our voice
Mhm.
is such a profound source for
Yeah.
creation. So I love the nature of the voice as the nature of change.
Oh yeah, for sure. And I think it's really lovely to bring in that piece around when you love teaching singing, because I'm also in the position where majority of people that come to me for voice coaching merge into the world of using it for healing and transformation and
Yeah.
impact. And so it's interesting how we then in our own quest for authenticity find ways to resonate that frequency that then allows the attraction of those people who are, or either
Yeah.
feel that it's congruent or they need it, or they don't necessarily know that consciously. I want to sing, and then actually, and I love that piece as well. So in terms of some of the work that you do, let's say you said that you do group coaching. What kind of things would you mostly focus on in a group setting? Because of course, in a one-to-one, it's very bespoke and
Yeah.
personal. So talk about the group session work that you do.
Well, it's great because I'm gonna launch this program in the new year that I've done before called For Your Voice, For Your Life, which is a group coaching program. And to be perfectly honest with you, Simone, I was hesitant for years to do group coaching. In fact, I didn't do it because of my experience in the one-to-one setting is that we are also unique, and there were these sort of like function. Everyone is in a body that functions similarly to everyone else's body on a fundamental level. That's the good news.
Yeah.
What makes that complicated is we're all the product of our experience and our conditioning, right? And so even though we have this similar functionality, there's an incredible variation. So I was so hesitant to bring people into a group to do the work because I was like, what do you do if someone like is really stuck in this area? Well, eventually I bit the bullet because so many people were asking for it. And what I realized is that the beauty of the group work is the community. Because one of the things that happens is we all believe ourselves to be so individual, and we are, that we miss the fact that we're all sharing this experience of being in a human body. And so one of the beautiful parts that happens is people hear each other sing and they go, oh, I relate to that experience. That happens in my throat too. I know that. Oh, I have the same fear too. Oh, that happened to you when you were in grade school. That happened to me too. And then suddenly there's this sense of community and momentum that comes with our collective energies. So I've just really grown to love this work. I think ultimately, if you want to facilitate like fundamental change in your voice, it really is best achieved in a one-to-one setting.
Mm-hmm.
I think that it is my experience and my body that I needed that one-to-one work to have someone externally give me that feedback.
Yeah.
The other thing that's so important is that change can happen in as short as one session, but integrated change generally takes a minimum of a couple of years. I mean, this is work that takes time because it's of the
Body, yeah.
body. It's of
Yeah.
the body. And so I don't promise any sort of quick fix to anything, but what I do promise is that right away you can be alerted to a whole new realm of possibility. Like
Mm.
suddenly you can make one sound and you can go, well, if I can do that, like
Yeah.
what else can I do? And that's one of the things that's cool in the group work, is that people start to see that in each other, and they start to um, in our last cohort of the For Your Voice for Your Life group, we were like 2 weeks in and this woman quit her job. And I'm not saying that I take pleasure in people quitting their jobs, but we were all kind of like, whoa. And then, so then other people started asking, well, maybe, what is possible for me? And that was
Mm.
so cool. Like, it was just really, really cool. I mean, she had been an accountant for many years. She wasn't happy in her work. The singing just like woke her up, and,
Yeah.
it pointed her on a new path. And I thought that was remarkable.
That's so beautiful. That's so beautiful. So earlier you spoke about your path to where you are now, and you mentioned divinity and the
Mm.
universe and the words that I completely relate to. And I wonder for you what this is like because of my own experience with improv. I wonder what it feels like for you in those moments when you are freely expressing and allowing yourself to play with sound. What do you feel in those moments, if anything, connected to? What's your relationship with that, with the divine and maybe channeling or things like that? I just wonder to know a little bit more about that space.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. It's funny. I, so having grown up in a religious setting, um, I have thought to myself that particularly improvisational singing is the future of any sort of devotional expression, because I believe that I don't think I think we're a long way off from there being no religions, but I do think now more than ever people are finding themselves questioning dogma, questioning some of the institutional aspects of religion. And I'm very, very fond of religion. I actually think I love that there are institutions that have lasted for thousands of years. I think that speaks a lot to what humans are capable of and what connects us.
Yeah.
That being said, I know that these institutions have hurt so many people, and there are so many folks who come to me, particularly having had profound experience in religious settings, using their voice, and they're like, I don't know where to get that now. Like, where do I
Mm.
go for that? Well, you make it up. No, I don't mean to make that so simple, but it is possible. So
Yeah.
when I am in this sort of flow of expression, when I allow myself to I let the syllables and the
Mm.
sounds flow through. Like, I connect to something that feels like it's greater than me. What that is, I
Yeah.
won't know in this lifetime. I don't need to know,
Yeah.
actually. But I know that music and sound and voice are my quickest, most direct channel to that. And so every time I engage in that, whether it's in the shower or whether it's in an intentional space around sound as a healing modality or leading others in collective song, man, fast, I'm like,
Yeah.
God exists.
Yeah. That's beautiful.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And a lot of people ask me about the improvisation as being like a light language or channeling. And to just be honest, like, that language doesn't resonate with me specifically in my experience. I don't take away from anyone else who
Of
uses
course.
that. My path to it was very simply around literally improvising syllables,
Yeah.
in the work I do to lead others in. Now I developed something that, if you're familiar with Bobby McFerrin, one of his colleagues and someone I've studied a lot with is a woman named Rhiannon, who is an incredible, incredible incredible teacher of improvisational singing and the spiritual work, but she uses the language of personal language. So when I just do what I did for you then, that feels like my personal language. And you talk about authentic self, that feels like my authentic self in a way that words can't
Mm-hmm.
get to, right? Like words are actually limiting.
Yeah.
Words keep us in the confines of language. And so when I sing like that, you interpret me based on your experience, and we
Hmm.
we share something that feels like greater
Yes.
than words could allow. Words
Yeah.
will always fall short.
Yeah.
So I think that we're experiencing spirit in that
Mm.
moment through the spirit of improvisation and my personal experience in my voice in this body.
Yeah. Oh, well, thank you for the snippet. That was straight to the heart for me. That
Oh,
was
good.
beautiful. Thank you. And I relate because a lot of the compositions that I create, or a lot of my own, when I'm in my voice baths, I rarely use words. Every now and then,
Yeah.
love or light and peace might fall into it, but it's all vowel based and syllables. So I completely relate to that. And I like that it's not, I need to know what I'm connecting to, because I don't think we really, well, maybe some people can say, yes, I know. But for me, I will say like you, it's not the what or who or what. It's more about the feeling of connection. And this feeling of allowing the sound to come through you and flow through you for whatever is needed in that moment. And I love that free space. I love that sonic, magical, I don't know, it's just, it's so palpable when you're there that you sometimes I think, I wonder if I could really describe this. And I think,
Yeah.
as you said, just words just fall short. There's just no way to quite describe that space. But it's a
Yeah.
beautiful, magical one.
It is, and it's a practice to be able to come to it. Like I
Yeah.
think that people hear me do what I did right then, and I didn't just one day start doing that. It's something that I return to over and over and over again because I'm just like everyone else, and that there's all sorts of bullshit that gets in the way of my story. And so it's a practice of coming home. It's like a homecoming each time that I sing and I allow myself. And the thing that is so exciting to me about improvisation, it's forever an exploration. Like
Yep.
it's always a question mark. It's always, where else can I go? Where else can I go? Where am I called to go? Where am I led
Mm.
to go? And so for me, it's like, where's the end of that? I never,
Yeah.
I never will be satisfied. And that's to me like so great, so exciting. There's always
Yeah.
more.
There's always more. That's beautiful. I think that is true for most things when it comes to our quest of learning. It's like that the let's say the amount of studies or training or things that we do in life, we realize, oh, I've just scratched the surface of this, and that's the beauty in it too, right? That's
Yes.
that we are the evolving beings that will constantly be evolving as things move forward. And I love that, the question mark, the adventure, where else can I go? This is beautiful. And of course, those questions then, as you speak about voice and life, I know you marry those two in your work as well. There is then that translation or parallel of what else is possible in my life. Like I can just leave my job because I know there's something else, or I can leave this marriage after 20 years because I'm happy in it, because I there's somewhere else that I can
Yes.
go. I don't know, but there is, and that's
Yeah.
that's so beautiful.
Yeah. And it's evidenced in the sounds that you make, like that. I know that, the voice is universal in terms of the human aspect of it.
Mm,
And we all, there's tons of research that shows that you don't even have to be good at it. Like just if you vibrate your body, you experience increased levels of dopamine, increased levels of oxytocin, decreased levels of cortisol. If you can make a humming noise, you can reap the benefits of singing, benefits of your voice. And so to me, like there's this just incredibly powerful aspect of I don't know, what is the reverberation of that? Like if I can do this one simple thing and I can feel better about being in my body and maybe feel better about the world, and then how does that impact how it is that I interact with other people? How does it impact the space that I'm in? One of the things I do with the reset is, so I had the pleasure of creating this sound experience at Orchestra Hall here in Chicago, which is home to the Chicago Symphony Orchestra.
Mm.
And one of the exercises that I did before we even got started was to have people sit in silence and listen for the previous sounds that had taken place in that space, because you're talking Yo-Yo Ma, you're talking
Yeah.
Renee Fleming, you're talking Denise Graves, you're talking, Itzhak Perlman, you're talking some of the great classical musicians of our time. Like, they are echoing about through here. And so,
Mm.
what is the impact of the residual nature of their sound? And
Yeah.
we can ask that about ourselves too. What is the impact of the residual, the reverberation, the resonance of
Mm.
my sound? And the impact is greater if my intention is to be expansive with it,
Yeah.
to be open, to
Mhm.
be curious, to be generous, to be gracious, to be
Yes.
loving, like all of that. If I can offer that to myself,
Yeah.
huge.
Yeah. Yeah. And it starts at home, doesn't it? Offering it to yourself, and then that being the expansion out into other community, world at large.
Yes.
And that's so precious. Oh, this is lighting me up so much. I'm so like, yes, 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 and everything that's coming out of your mouth. So talk a little bit about your own creative practices, because I know that you improvise, you play, you have your work, and these are all things that are intertwined, not necessarily set one separate to the other. But what are some of the creative practices that you say, all right, today this is what I've got to do, or this is what I do every day? Talk a little bit about that, if it's different from what you've already described.
Yeah, I mean, so one of my biggest creative practices is I use loopers to create, like I said, these immersive experiences. That in the immersion of that. So I had gone to a sound healing workshop at a place called the Menla Institute in upstate New York, where we worked with acoustic instruments like the gong and the crystal singing bowls and tuning forks and metal
Mm.
bowls and so forth. Um, and while I was there, I was immersed deeply previous to that in improvisational singing, and particularly around leading groups
Mhm.
in improvisational singing. And I don't know, I was just like at this workshop going, what would happen if we were singing while this was all happening? And so I came home and got a looper at the time. And if anyone's not familiar, like a looper is a device that like records your voice and then you create layers, or you could record anything, but you create layers.
Yeah.
But I was creating these loops with the intention of leading others. So I was like creating a improvised part that I would give over to like a section of the group, and then another part that meshed with that went. And this is the premise of circle singing. So to this day, years later, I still create these loops routinely and create layer upon layer upon layer upon layer of sound, some of which are rhythmic, some of which are drone like. And then I integrate electronic beats with that. So I
Mhm.
will utilize electronic beats and then create loops that align with the beats that are improvised phrases that I create. So my practice around singing very much centers this sort of creation. And if I have lots of recordings out in the world on all the streaming services and Insight Timer, the Insight Timer app, where you
Yeah.
can hear a bit of what it is that I'm doing. And it is just a practice. It's something. Recently I transitioned all of my hardware gear into an iPad, because
Yeah.
I'm going to be doing a lot of traveling. And I was like, how can I travel more lightly? And so it was very difficult to do, but it's been very creatively invigorating to have like a new mode of doing what it is that I do. So I've really been hot and heavy on it lately, just like every day sitting down at the
Mm.
iPad and like singing and creating layers and making new sounds. I also use effects on my voice too. So
Yeah.
um, I just try to make my voice sound like as many different things as possible.
Beautiful, all part of the play. I
Yeah.
love that. And when I checked out some of your videos, I really love, because this is what I said, I thought, oh, I definitely need to reach out to Davin and have a chat. That you and I will say that I believe this to be true, having spoken to you for 40 minutes now. For you, as a person, you'll let me know if I'm on track here. But there is something about this collaboration and marriage between this digital modern
Yeah.
age and the natural aspects and nature aspects, so much so that your visuals are you with your looper and everything in a
In the woods.
forest somewhere in the woods, and it's just like you're just dancing with the trees. It's just so beautiful to witness, and I can sense that in you now, this really deep connection to that natural nature being that you are with this modern world that we're living in, and marrying that so beautifully in your work.
Yeah. Well, because I think what I was going to say earlier that I forgot to say is I remember when I was at this workshop, the people that were hosting it were very sort of against using amplified sound. That there are purists that don't think that, and that's fine. In certain spaces, I would be against it too. And like I said, what I do verges, it's closer to a concert than, like, say, a traditional sound bath,
Yeah.
but typically people are on their backs the whole time. Sometimes people move their bodies. um but the thing I'm interested in actually is the voice aspect of the digital work that I'm doing, because of the humanity.
Hmm.
So I'm actually not interested. I've played around with synthesizers and things like that, and I could utilize those. But any sound that you hear, other than the beats, any sound that you hear in my music, other that's not acoustic, that's not like a crystal singing bowl or a gong or a tuning fork, any sound you hear is of my voice.
Yeah.
And to me, that's really the exciting part about the work, is that no one could ever duplicate it.
No.
And no one could ever make the sounds that I make. Like, there, I fear that we're on the verge of AI being able to come close, but there's still like a truth. There's like a truth to my
Yes.
voice that is only reflected in me using my voice through these tools. So I think that there's an organic nature to my experiences, that even though they're amplified and even though they again move toward music, it's still something that feels natural in its expression. I mean, and the other aspect of this too is I never plan in advance. Again, with the exception of the beats, I will plan the beats, but I never plan in advance additional ways in which I'm going to use my voice. I just kind of like roll with it and see what
Yeah.
comes through. And usually what's coming through is inspired by the people that I'm with, this inspired by the trees, the space,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
that's the inspiration for the sound.
Yeah, yeah, that's beautiful. And I relate to that very much. And the compositions that I do, roughly half an hour sonic experiences, they're all one take. It's just whatever needs to come out in that
Yeah.
moment. And then I can brush things up, but I never go
Yes.
back and redo because it feels like it's coming away from what wanted to naturally
Yes.
emerge. And I know the process of editing. I mean, I was a session singer. I used to do all sorts, and I can imagine how many times I had to sing something and then let's just get this harmony, let's double, all that kind of stuff. It's so not that.
Yes.
Though I will play with harmony and
Yeah.
bringing things in,
Oh,
and a lot of the work that I did with choirs was very much that. Not so much improv, but we would create all the sounds. And most of my background in the choir field is a cappella, and
mm-hmm.
so we would have the bass would be the sound,
Yeah.
creating those doom doom doom, those kind of
Yeah.
sounds, and then someone else creating a drum beat, and so it would all be this orchestra of voices creating it. And that particular what you're saying, I like that because there is this element of like possibility again of
Yes.
what we
Yeah.
can create and what we can create and what comes together.
I
um
always I always tell people at my experiences, and I don't think they believe me, but I mean it, that it's a co-creation,
mhm.
because what I'm doing is inspired by their presence in the space. That
Yes.
what I created would be, not the same if they weren't there. And it's also true of the physical space that I'm in, depending on the hall that I'm in or the building or whatever. Like that
Yes.
is all blending in, integrating into the sounds. The sounds are dependent upon those things, and I don't take those things for granted. I'm so grateful
Yeah.
for that.
Yeah.
Me in the woods is
Beautiful.
a very different experience than me in a room with a bunch of people.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, for sure. Yes, that collaboration, that connection, that offering, it's an energetic exchange on so many levels. So I
Yes.
do have a question about voice because this is something that I'm noticing more and more, maybe more and more consciously now, in my life, personally, not just in the work field. How much do you, how, what's the best way to phrase this? How much are you able to read a person? Like, we all do this consciously and unconsciously in life, right? Someone walks into a room, oh, I really like their vibe. We're talking about them as an energy being, or there's something that's off for me. We're not quite sure what, the intuition, all of that. But coming to the voice, how much can you read by listening to someone's voice about them and where they are in that moment, their state of
Yeah.
being and such?
Yeah. Oh, I love that question. I mean, look, that's as close as I know myself to be in terms of the psychic realm. Like,
Yeah.
and I don't like it certainly stems from intuition. I'm a full wholehearted believer in the power of intuition and deep knowing. And, and I think that so many of us are conditioned away from touching that spiritual aspect of ourselves, that
Yeah.
gut feeling. But that being said, I've been coaching for um it's like 22 years now. So I've heard a lot of voices. And
Yeah.
what happens over time is that you start to identify patterns. So and this is where like archetypes come in.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
so you start to hear that, oh, certain experiences with certain sounds, certain ways in which people experience constriction or tension, or they feel stuck, or they feel inhibited,
Yeah.
or someone who struggles to make a louder sound, or someone who really can't pull their voice back. Those are reflective of other areas of their lives.
Yes.
I heard this is a number of years ago, I was at a conference for it's called the Voice Foundation here in the US in Philadelphia. And I sat in on a talk with some speech pathologists that had done research around, and pardon if this is a trigger for anyone, but childhood sexual abuse
Mhm.
and vocal injury in the relationship to childhood sexual abuse, like
Yes.
voice pathology, that it was very, very common for folks who had, voice pathology, particularly lesions on the vocal folds, or, calluses, or whatever language you want to use around them.
Yes.
Nodules is what people used to say,
Yeah.
in a history of childhood sexual abuse. And I say that to say that our voice, again, is of our body. It's the
Yeah.
primary way in which we can or can't express ourselves. And it always tells the story of where we are right there in that moment in our relationship to the whole. So,
Yes.
based
Yes.
on how someone's communicating with you,
You
but
do.
yeah. And so there's so much in all of our sounds, for better or for worse. But this is also why, like, the work that you do and the work that you're guiding others to do is so powerful, because if you can channel that sound, if
Mm.
you can align that sound in a way that is moving towards healing, that's moving towards growth, that's moving towards transformation, again, you write a permission slip for that other person to do
Yeah.
the same, to break free of the traumas of their past.
Yes, yes. I mean, the patterns are huge, and I know there's a lot of research around that. I had a very clear example of that before training as a sound healer. Actually, I went into a clinic for women with eating disorders,
Yeah.
and at that time, I was going, I mean, sound healing unofficially, because of course you're doing it anyway. But I
Right.
went in to work with them as a choir and to bring sound and singing just to help them lift their mood and help them feel better. And the transformation after 6 weeks in going to just do weekly sessions for 6 weeks was so mind blowing. One, the voices were usually quite soft and whispery,
Yeah.
and they weren't, very connected to their sound as a generalization. Of course, that's not everyone's experience. And then when we started working, and this was just with some traditional repertoire, like what do you want to sing today, and bringing harmonies and all of this stuff, the more connected
Mm-hmm.
we all became in those moments to our voice, our sound, to each other, the more transformative it was. And the feedback was, I actually, in my last few sessions with my therapist, finally was able to voice
Yeah.
what this stems from, or now I'm able to tell my family what it felt like when dot
Yeah.
dot dot. And it's just so beautiful and rewarding.
Yeah.
that something, as you said, in such a short space of time could be such a life transformation. I don't take that for granted either.
Yeah. The voice, working with the voice and on the voice in particular, is always simultaneously working the somatic embodied experience of the voice
Yes.
and the metaphor of the voice. You
Mm.
know, it's always, you're never just talking about the
Yeah.
vibration. You're talking about the implications of the vibration, the stories, you know. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's very, very powerful. And if you think about, especially, I mean, so many women in particular have experienced a lifetime of feeling like they were meant to be quiet, that they were
Mhm.
not able to speak up. Especially anyone who has been in culture has told them that they were part of a marginalized community. You know, this was very much my experience from a young age, is that if I was on stage and I was performing, like I was allowed to express myself boldly, but in other situations and scenarios, you know, I was meant to keep it under wraps,
Right.
and that has implications for how it is that you're able to show up in your life.
Yes.
And then what happens though is it can have somatic implications. There can be, you know, nervous system regulation issues. There can be actual physical chronic constriction as a result of the protective mechanism of feeling like you needed to stay quiet, or you couldn't
Yep.
express yourself, or you couldn't say, you know, what the truth of your experience was. So I always feel like if I'm able to help someone pull back, you know, one layer of that, it's going to reveal the next one, which will
Hmm.
continue to, you know, allow them to find, to get back to that authentic self, to build it,
Yeah.
you know, bring that full circle, to get back to the essence.
Yeah, yeah, that's beautiful. And I think it's sometimes it's very obvious when these conditionings have happened, whether
Yes.
it's like the teacher or the parent or whoever's in authority, better to be seen, not heard,
Everyone's
you're
got
a
that
child, you
story.
don't speak, this, all these things that we have.
Yeah.
But sometimes it's those unconscious things that are born
Yes.
too, right? That we're not even aware why is it that I'm not speaking up, or what
Yes.
is it that's hard for me to express? I know my own story was very much I had, and I wouldn't say it was one thing in particular, but it was definitely a few things that I could consciously bring to mind as an adult in reflection. But for me, it was being afraid of confrontation.
Yeah.
I felt like I could speak up in my home and everything, and I could speak, but it was this confrontation that would just
Mm,
somehow my voice would just get a little quieter, and
right.
I was able to, express myself. But why is this voice different? It's the telephone voice is different to the one that you might speak to your children with or
Yep.
your father with, or so I find it how interesting that we adapt and the way the voice changes to suit
Yes.
that external catalyst.
And
And
it's remarkable. I mean, it's remarkable that it does, right? You know, like like ultimately that's a gift because it's a protective mechanism. It's a
yes.
mechanism for survival. It's also a mechanism for flourishing, you know,
Mhm,
like
mhm.
that's what I think when someone tells me a story like that, the first thought I've conditioned myself to think is like, thank God you have that
Yeah.
deep knowing, you know, you have that deep knowing. But now that you've identified it, let's really ask ourselves, is that serving your current situation? At
Yes,
some point you
exactly.
learned that that was what was necessary, but
Then,
is that what's happening now, you know? So
yeah,
if not,
yeah,
let's step into something new. Let's try to condition something new. Let's connect
yes,
with the real truth of your current situation.
yes,
Powerful.
yes. Powerful. And a lot of the inner child work comes up there as
Mm,
well, really,
yes.
because gosh, don't we know, don't we know? So
Yeah.
very random thrown about question, and I like to ask sound healers this question because it's hard to choose one, but let's just say that there was one. What sound do you love?
You know, my voice is the first thing I want to say.
I love the sound of my voice.
It's
Good.
true, you know, it's true. Yeah, I mean, I guess like yeah. Um
That's
yeah,
beautiful. Don't
that's sort
change
of
it.
like
Don't change it. That's just
okay.
exactly,
All
that's
right, I'm feeling like
exactly.
slightly self-conscious about that choice, but that is honestly like and I honestly even people who have a complicated relationship with their voices, we all love the sound of our own voice because of it's an experience. Like the sound of my voice is not just a sound, it's an
Yeah,
experience, you know. And so
yeah,
I'm so grateful to have access
yeah.
to that. But I will say I do want to also add that I grew up in Michigan, the state of Michigan in the U.S., and um, there are these like fields, like these like meadow type fields. And I think about like a warm summer day where the breeze is blowing, like the sound of the tall grass, like in the leaves moving through. That sound is a very strong, and even like when I think of the sound, I can feel the heat, like the temperature of my body. So
Beautiful.
that's also a very powerful sound for me.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, I know that you laughed and we kind of had a tongue-in-cheek exchange, but I absolutely want to actually honor that because a lot of the work that we both do is helping people
Yeah.
to love their voice.
Yes.
It is helping them to connect with that sound and go, you know what? Yes.
Yes.
This and giving themselves permission to just be and sound and allow that out. And so loving your voice is the absolute
Yep.
truth, and it's beautiful. So as much as we can laugh about it, I do want to kind of bring that honor to it
I
because
appreciate that. Thank you.
reverence, because it's so beautiful. And I love the sound of my voice as
Yeah,
well. And I
you
can pick
should.
out a few different things in nature. For me, it's very much the sea, and I can't wait to be in the beach in the sun. That's coming soon. And so all of that just to say, this is so beautiful. I love that. These conversations could go on, but I want to kind of keep it to roughly around this hour time for my
Yeah.
guests. And I just wanted to say, first of all, thank you. Thank you for your presence and, you know, just for the work that you do. I feel so connected in the sense that we have a lot of commonality and threads that I feel are really resonant in this moment as well.
Yeah.
So I'm so grateful, and, you know, helping others to really own and claim the power of their voice. There is, I don't want to say there's nothing like it, but really there is nothing
No,
like
there isn't. Yeah.
it. There's nothing like it. And I'm so grateful to you. So thank you so much for your presence today, Davin. I really appreciate you.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. And you know, in all the great mythological traditions, singing does sit at the top of the arc of the artistic creative hierarchy.
Yes.
There is no experience. You know, dancing is probably the closest that you can
Yeah.
get, but there is no more holistic experience of oneself in creativity and new creation than using one's voice. So I used to be a little apologetic about that, but I'm like, no, it's
No,
true. You know, the
good.
experience of playing your guitar is awesome, but it's not the same as singing. And usually guitar players want to sing too. So
Yeah,
I'm
I've had many
unabashed.
debates about this with my musician friends. I love it. So I will, of course, put all of your links below this episode. And I like to end these podcasts with the same question to all of my guests. And that is, what is your soulful sound to the world? A
Mm,
self prayer or desire that you
mm.
wish upon the world?
Yeah. I feel like in the current, there are a lot of existential threats that we are up against currently. And in the midst of that, we can feel our own presence or our own capacity to be quite futile or small.
Mm,
And so I wish for me to remember for myself and for everyone that I might come into contact with to know the profound and deep power that they have toward creating positive change, toward expansion, toward growth, toward creation, toward flourishing.
mm.
So my sound and my prayer is that we all maintain a deep, deep, deep knowing of our capacity to move the trajectory of this whole human story toward more wholeness and toward more love.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for that. That's a sound that's reverberating right now in the
Yes.
world. Thank you for your time today, Davin. It's been a pleasure.
My pleasure. Loved this conversation. Thank you so
Me
much.
too. Thank you. Thanks so much for tuning in. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. Please feel free to share it with your friends and remember to subscribe. From my heart to yours, sending you love, healing, and sound wherever you are.